Namaskar. In this session, I will discuss about data interpretation and academic writing. To begin with, data interpretation. So, data interpretation plays a crucial role in research methodology because it transforms raw information into meaningful knowledge. Data interpretation ensures that research findings are connected back to the research questions, allowing the researchers to explain what the data meant, why it mattered, and how it contributes to scholarly understanding. Now, there are different approaches to the data interpretation. There are three major types. One is deductive, then inductive, and abductive interpretation. The first one, deductive interpretation. So, deductive interpretation begins with a pre-existing theory or a model or a hypothesis. It begins with a theory or well-established idea that provides assumptions or predictions about what should happen in the study. After collecting and analyzing the data, the interpretation involves confirming or rejecting those predictions. This approach ensures that interpretation is systematic, logical, and grounded in existing scientific knowledge. The second is inductive interpretation. It works in especially qualitative strategies. Instead of starting with a fixed theory or a hypothesis, the researcher begins by directly examining the raw data such as interview, observation, text, or field notes. The researcher allows patterns, categories, and themes to emerge naturally from the data. These insights are further refined to form the broader concepts. And finally, these concepts contribute to the development of new theory or a new model. Then comes the abductive interpretation. The abductive interpretation is the middle path combining both empirical observations and theoretical reasoning. It begins with the real-life observation made through data collection, especially when the results are unexpected or do not fit the existing assumptions. When data reveals unexpected or unclear results, the researcher seeks the most plausible explanation using both existing theory and creative insights. Now, to understand this, let me ask you one or two multiple choice questions. Deductive reasoning moves from A. Specific observations to general conclusions. B. General principles to specific conclusions. C. Unrelated events to general theories. Or D. Hypothesis to guessing only. The answer is B. General principles to specific conclusions. Now let me explain the techniques for data interpretation. When researchers collect the qualitative data such as interviews, observations, written text, or cultural artifacts, they need specific interpretive techniques to understand deeper insights behind the data. Let me discuss. The first is thematic analysis. It focuses on identifying patterns or recurring themes in the data. Researchers read and code the data and to find common ideas, attitudes, or experiences. It is useful when trying to understand what people think or feel about the topic. The next is content analysis. A systematic and objective technique it is, and it involves coding the data into categories and counting how often certain words, ideas, or symbols appear. It can be both qualitative or quantitative in nature. The third is narrative analysis. It examines stories by participants, focuses on structure, characters, and meaning with personal accounts. It is used when studying identity, personal experience, or cultural narratives. Then fourth is discourse analysis. It studies language use in social contexts. It looks for power relations, ideology, social norms embedded in the language. The fifth one is hermeneutics, a traditional humanities method. It involves deep interpretation of text, symbols, cultural artifacts. It focuses on historical and cultural contexts to uncover hidden meanings. The sixth is phenomenological interpretation. It is used to study human lived experiences. It seeks to understand how individuals perceive and experience a phenomenon. It focuses on emotions, consciousness, and personal meaning. For example, exploring first generation college students experience the academic pressure. The next one is the quantitative interpretation techniques, and this is used to analyze the numerical data and draw conclusions that needs to be generalized beyond the sample that is being studied. Descriptive statistics is first employed to summarize the organized data using measures like mean, median, or graphs or percentages. Once you get the patterns, then the next part is inferential statistics to make predictions and generalize the findings to the larger population. And this involves tools like t-test, ANOVA, or regression to determine how strongly variables are related or whether there is a difference among the groups or which is meaningful. Finally, hypothesis testing is used to check whether the observed results are statistically significant. Let me ask you a few multiple choice questions. 1. Thematic analysis is primarily used in A. Quantitative data interpretation, B. Qualitative data interpretation, C. Mechanical computation only, or D. Chemical experiments. The answer is B. Qualitative data interpretation. Second, which technique involves numerical analysis to interpret data? Is it A. Content analysis, B. Statistical techniques, C. Narrative interpretation, or D. Discourse analysis? The answer is B. Statistical techniques. Third question. Content analysis focuses on A. Counting and categorizing patterns in textual data, B. Fabricating information based on opinion, C. Only analyzing numbers, or D. Ignoring context in text? The answer is A. Counting and categorizing patterns in textual data. I hope you got your answers right. Moving on. So, maintaining quality and rigor in data interpretation is crucial to ensure that research findings are credible, reliable, and meaningful. In quantitative research, this involves establishing validity and reliability so that interpretations drawn from numerical data are accurate and constant. In qualitative research, the focus is on ensuring credibility and trustworthiness, which means the interpretation genuinely reflects participants' perspectives and the context of the study. The researchers must also practice reflexivity, meaning they remain aware of their own assumptions, beliefs, and influence on the interpretation process, especially where meanings can be subjective. Additionally, transparency is essential as researchers must clearly explain the steps taken to arrive at this interpretation. Now let me discuss the interpretation techniques in English studies. The first one is close reading. It is a fundamental interpretive technique used mainly in literary studies to analyze a text very closely and carefully to uncover hidden layers of meaning. It involves deep and slow examination of language features such as word choice, imagery, metaphors, symbolism, tone, or narrative structure. The next one is thematic analysis, which we have just discussed previously. It identifies recurring themes, ideas, or concepts. It is widely used across English studies because it helps researchers notice patterns that reveal deep meaning. Third is discourse analysis. Again, we discussed previously. It is mostly used in linguistic and cultural studies to examine how language shapes social meaning, power relations, ideology in communication. The fourth one is stylistics. The stylistics lies between linguistic and literature, focusing on how linguistic features such as grammar, sound patterns, sentence structures, and figures of speech create artistic effects on text. It combines objective linguistic analysis with aesthetic judgment. The fifth is corpus-based interpretation. Now, corpus-based interpretation uses large digital collection of real language data or corpora to uncover patterns of frequency and usage that is not easily seen through manual reading. It provides evidence-based insights about how words and structure functions in the real communication. Then comes critical theory. Critical theory is used in literature and cultural studies to examine how texts represent power, ideology, social inequality, and identity. It allows interpretation to move beyond the text and explore how literature interacts with historical, political, and cultural context. These techniques show that the interpretation is not one-dimensional. Rather, it can be text-centered, theme-centered, society-centered, or data-centered. By selecting the right technique or combining multiple methods, researchers provide richer and more meaningful interpretations. Now let's talk about the role of theory here. Now theory plays a crucial role in the data interpretation because it provides a guiding framework that helps researchers understand and explain their findings in a meaningful way. Rather than interpreting data in isolation, theory offers a lens through which patterns, behaviors, and meanings can be viewed and evaluated. By choosing an appropriate theoretical perspectives relevant to the research focus, researchers can justify their interpretations. Let me ask you a few multiple choice questions. In literary research, data interpretation often relies on A. Numerical data sets alone, B. Mechanical coding without theory, C. Thematic and critical analysis of text, or D. Ignoring secondary criticism. The answer is C. Thematic and critical analysis of text. To conclude this data interpretation part, data interpretation is actually a heart of the research. Without it, findings cannot contribute to knowledge. And ultimately, a good interpretation directly answers your research questions, connects findings with context and theory, explains the significance, and shows originality and critical thinking. Now let me discuss the academic writing part in the research methodology, which is again an integral part of it. Now there are different types of academic writing. It could be expository, argumentative, descriptive, analytical, or persuasive. Number one, expository writing. Expository writing aims to convey information, explain a topic, provide instructions. It is characterized by clarity, objectivity, and focus on presenting facts rather than personal opinions. The second is argumentative writing. Argumentative writing seeks to persuade the reader to accept a particular stance or a viewpoint on an issue. It presents a clear thesis statement, supports it with evidence, and addresses counter arguments. Third is descriptive writing, where descriptive writing creates a vivid picture by using sensory detail, vivid language, figurative expressions. Its goal is to engage the reader's imagination and convey a detailed portrayal of the subject. The fourth is analytical writing. Analytical writing involves breaking down a complex issue into its components, examining them critically, and drawing conclusions. It goes beyond description and delves into why and how of the subject. The fifth is the persuasive writing. It aims to influence the reader's belief, attitude, and action. It presents an argument and uses rhetorical devices to appeal to emotions, logic, and ethics. The techniques used is emotional appeals, logos, ethos, or credible evidence and statistics. Now let me discuss the characteristics of academic writing. The first one is the formal tone. Academic writing should maintain a serious and respectful and professional style. It should use full forms. Instead of don't, you should write do not. Use academic vocabulary. That means using the words like significant, analyze, or investigate. Avoid personal language and emotions unless it is necessary here. A formal tone shows that the writer understands and respects the academic standards. For example, instead of saying, this story is cool and awesome, you should write, this narrative demonstrates a complex exploration of identity. The next aspect is clarity and precision. Writing must be easy to understand and free of confusion. How to write clearly? Well, use exact words, avoid unnecessarily long sentences, explain the new and complex terms, and stick to the topic of the paragraph. Clarity helps the reader grasp your ideas easily. For example, instead of mentioning the poem is about things that happens in life, one should write the poem focuses on the inevitability of the change through metaphors of time. The third is objectivity. The focus should be on facts, theories, and arguments and not personal opinions. Third person is preferred, means the study shows this or that. Personal emotions and bias to be minimized. This improves credibility and fairness. For example, instead of writing, I hate how the author uses violence, you should write, the frequency of use of violent imagery intensifies the theme of conflict. Then comes the fourth point, evidence-based argumentation. Every claim must be supported using data, research studies, theoretical concepts, and textual quotations. Evidence proves that the argument is valid and trustworthy. For example, instead of writing a woman was treated badly in Victorian era, one should write Victorian society imposed gender roles that limited women's autonomy as shown in, and you cite that sources. The fifth is cohesion and structure. Academic writing is organized in a logical flow. Good structure includes clear paragraphs with topic sentences, smooth transition like the usage of therefore, however, or moreover. Then it should have a beginning, a middle part, and the end that leads to conclusion. Then proper headings to be mentioned if and when required. So cohesion helps the reader follow and your thinking step by step. Sixth point is citation ethics. Readers must credit all the ideas and information taken from others. Why it matters? Well, to avoid plagiarism, that is intellectual theft, to show honesty and respect for other scholars, to help readers find your sources that you have used. So citation ethics protect academic trust and originality. Let me ask you a few multiple choice questions. Question 1. Academic writing is primarily characterized by A. Informal tone and personal opinions, B. Formal style and evidence-based arguments, C. Slang and conversational language, or D. Narrative storytelling focus. The answer is B. Formal style and evidence-based arguments. Next question. Which of the following should be avoided in academic writing? A. Clear structure, B. Colloquial expressions, C. Logical argumentation, or D. Proper citation. The answer is B. Colloquial expressions. Now, academic writing is very iterative in nature. Researchers move through the cycle of preparation, drafting, feedback, and then revision. Mostly the stages are understanding the research topic, leading to formulating the research questions and objectives. Then based upon the objectives, you have the review of the literature. Then based upon the literature and your questions, you have the designing of research methodology, which decides how you want to collect and analyze your data. Then drafting and structuring the report, and finally editing, proofreading, and finalizing your research. The most common structure which is used is called an IMRAD. It is IMRAD, IMRAD. The acronym stands for I, introduction, M, method or methodology, R goes for results, A is and D is for discussion. So this structure helps present research in a logical and easy to follow way. First one, introduction, it explains the research problem, purpose and background and research questions or the hypothesis. Then comes M, the method, describes the methodology, how the research was conducted, participants, tools, data collection, and the other analysis procedures. Then comes the results, presents the findings of the study objectively using tables, figures, summaries, but without interpretation. And finally, the discussion. It interprets the results by explaining their meaning, connecting them with the literature theory, and stating implications, limitations, and future directions. Let me share another writing technique. It's called PEEL, PEEL. It's a paragraph writing strategy used to help the structure ideas very clearly and logically. The acronym stands for P, which is a point, starts the paragraph with a clear topic sentence and states the main argument or the idea. Then E, evidence or example, provides supporting information such as quotations, statistics, research findings, or examples to prove the point. Then comes another E, which is the explanation here. Explain how and why your evidence supports your point. This is where you analyze and give deeper meaning to the evidence. Then comes the L, link. Conclude the paragraph by linking back to your main argument or transitioning smoothly to the next idea. So PEEL helps to write well-organized, coherent, and persuasive paragraphs. Academic writing in English studies has a special conventions because the data and methods are different from the scientific fields. Research deals with text, language, culture, and interpretation. So therefore, the expectation in writing is also very unique. Each of it has its own conventions. Let me discuss one by one. 1. Evidence in English studies. Here the arguments are based on interpretation, not laboratory experiments. So the evidence comes from textual evidence, quotations, passages, scenes from novels or poems. Then linguistic data, conversations, interviews, corpora, classroom speech. Then discourse samples, news articles, advertisements, social media texts. Then cultural materials like films, rituals, and public speeches. The second is methodology. In this, research does not rely mainly on numbers. Instead, it focuses on interpretative, qualitative approaches, meaning the researchers must explain how the interpretation is done, which theory, which text selection, and why these choices matter. The third one is the style. The writing style must be argumentative. Every statement must link to the main argument, theoretically grounded and analytical. Fourth is data. Data here is usually not numbers. It is poems, plays, essays, films, social media contexts, survey responses. Then comes the voice. Generally uses third person formal writing, but first person saying, I argue this, may be used when presenting interpretation. Personal reflections can be including if justified by theory. Why? Because interpretation is scholarly perspective. Acknowledging the researcher's viewpoint improves transparency. And however, voice should still be impersonal and academic and not emotional or informal. And finally, objective is actually conceptual. In scientific fields, objectivity is shown through numerical data. In English studies, objectivity is equals to reasonable interpretation supported by evidence or theory. Even if the interpretation differs, what matters is logical reasoning, textual support, and scholarly references. So debates and multiple viewpoints are encouraged and normal here. Now the IMRAD model may not always apply in the stricter form here. The recommended structure goes from its title, then abstract, then introduction, then literature review with theoretical framework, methodology if it is empirical, then analysis, discussion organized by the themes, then conclusions or implications, and finally the references. So an abstract is a brief summary of the research paper, usually written in 150 to 300 words, that presents a topic, purpose, method on the main argument and significance of the study in one concise paragraph. The writing the introduction is very important of the research paper. It prepares the readers to understand the study. A strong introduction first provides context about the topic. It highlights the research gap, what is still missing and unexplored, and it should connect the study to the theoretical framework. Then comes the literature review. A literature review is critical section of the research where you examine and discuss existing scholarly work related to your research topic. That is, what is already known, what scholars agree or disagree on, what is missing, and where the research gap is there. So writing the methodology is again an aspect of research writing where It describes the approach, materials and data sources, analytical techniques, and justification of your choices. Majorly, the components it includes is research design, that is to identify the overall approach, data or text selection that explain sources from why you have chose them, theoretical framework, methods of analysis, tools or instruments, ethical consideration, and the limitations. Now, data analysis and argumentation. In data analysis is a stage where researchers closely examines the text, discourse, and linguistic material to answer research questions. Because research here is mainly qualitative and interpretative, the analysis and argumentation becomes the heart of the study. What to do in the analysis section? Present the key data, quotations, transcripts, or textual segments. Interpret the deeper meaning of those data. Connects finding to theory and research questions. Support claims using secondary scholarship. The arguments must include its textual evidence, secondary scholarship, critical reasoning. Evidence alone is not enough. A researcher must explain how the evidence proves the argument. Now, writing academic conclusion and implication is the final section of the thesis. It brings a closure to the study by summarizing the main findings and show how they answer the research questions and explain the value and the impact of the research. What to include over here? Reconfirm the topic and purpose, summarize the major findings, meanings and interpretation, implications and contributions, limitations very briefly, and finally suggestions for future research. Next, I would like to discuss about another aspect called citation and reference. Well, referencing is a process of giving credit to the author's theories and text sources that you have used in the research. Why referencing matters? Because good reference ensures academic credibility. The purpose is avoids plagiarism, show research depth, provides evidence, acknowledges intellectual property, and allows verification where readers can locate the cited sources. What to reference here? You must reference any information that is not your original idea. Quotations from primary text, ideas and interpretations from critics, definitions of theoretical concepts, factual information, data, statistics, media sources, web contents, interviews. Even when paraphrasing, sources must be cited. Now, there are two different components of referencing. One is in-text citation. This is a short reference inside the sentence where you mention the idea or the quotation. Next is the reference list, bibliography, or work cited. This appears at the end of the assignment, thesis, or article with full details of every sources cited in the text. So, component of in-text citation shows whose idea is used, and without it, readers gets confused or thinks it's your idea, which leads to plagiarism. Second, reference list, it shows where the full source details, and without it, you cannot verify or locate the source. So, in-text citation shows where you use the source, and reference list shows what the source is. Now, there are various common academic style guides such as APA, American Psychological Association, then MLA, Modern Language Association, and Chicago Manual of Style. These play a significant role in standardizing the conventions of academic writing. The choice of citation style depends on the subject matter, the nature of the study, and expectations of the discipline. The MLA, which is Modern Language Association referencing style, is widely used in English studies, especially in literature, cultural studies, and humanities research, because it emphasizes the author and the page number. In MLA style, in-text citations are placed directly after a quotation or paraphrased idea and follow the format like author's last name with page number in the first bracket without a comma. If the author's name appears in the sentence, only the page number is included in the parenthesis. The works cited page, which appears at the end of the paper, lists full publication details of every source cited. It arranged alphabetically by the author's last name. Book titles and journals names are italicized, while articles and chapters titles appear in quotation marks. Only the first word of the title and the proper nouns are capitalized. Standard entries include author's name, title of the work, publisher, and the year of the publication. On the other hand, APA, American Psychological Association referencing style, is used where in-text citation includes author's last name and the year of publication, while direct quotations also require page number. At the end of the paper, the reference list provides complete details of every cited source arranged alphabetically by author's last name and formatted using a hanging indent. The next concept is quoting. In academic writing, especially in English studies, the quote serves as the quote data for interpretation. Quoting is not just copying, it must serve your argument. There are short quotations where you have 1 to 3 lines of text, or block quotations where you have 4+ lines or 3+ lines of poetry, or in APA format 40+ words. How to incorporate quotes effectively? It's using the method ICE. I, introduce, provide the context, who is speaking, when and why. Cite, give proper in-text citation. Then explain, analyze or interpret the quotation's meaning. To summarize, data interpretation in academic writing means explaining what your data mean and not just presenting your results. In short, it answers the questions, what do these results that this data tell us? So I hope you have understood the concepts of data interpretation in academic writing. With this, I conclude my today's sessions. Thank you. Namaskar.